The land that remembers. In the heart of Central Africa, where vast stretches of red earth meet endless horizons of forests and savanna, lies a land shaped by memory and guided by ancient rhythms. This land is Kasai, a region whose history begins not with the arrival of explorers or the discovery of diamonds, but with the deep and enduring relationship between its people and the earth beneath their feet. Long before the world learned of the treasures hidden beneath the Kasai soil, communities here lived in harmony with the rivers, the forests, and the spirits of their ancestors. Life in Kasai moved at a pace set by the sun, the seasons, and the beat of drums carried by the wind. For centuries, the people of Kasai built their identity around the land that sustained them. The Kasai River, broad and life-giving, wound its way across the region like a living artery. Its tributaries, the Sankuru, the Lulua, the Tishikapa, spread outward into the countryside, feeding fishing villages, farmlands, and trading paths that connected communities across great distances. Along these waters, the earliest Bantu-speaking settlers planted their crops, forged their tools, and nurtured their children with stories handed down through generations. From these early roots emerged societies that valued tradition, respect, and collective well-being. Among them were the Luba and the Lulua peoples, whose cultural worlds shaped much of Kasai's early history. The Luba, who developed one of Central Africa's great pre-colonial civilizations, understood leadership not simply as authority, but as a sacred responsibility. The Mulopwe, or king, was more than a political ruler. He was the bridge between the living and the ancestors, the protector of harmony, and the guardian of memory. With councils of elders and spiritual advisors beside him, the Luba king upheld systems of justice and balance that had guided people long before written history. The Lulua communities, smaller in scale but rich in tradition, lived according to principles of kinship, cooperation, and spiritual awareness. Their identity was rooted in the clan, where each family line carried a history preserved in stories, totems, and sacred objects. Elders played a central role in shaping community decisions, and their guidance extended into every part of life, from conflict resolution to marriage negotiations. In both Luba and Lulua societies, leadership was earned not through force, but through wisdom, generosity, and a deep understanding of tradition. Before diamonds, culture was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Art was not entertainment, it was the living archive of the people. Woodcarvers shaped figures that told stories of ancestors, rulers, and mythic heroes. Their hands moved with knowledge taught by generations before them. Cuba cloth, woven with intricate geometric patterns, reflected a mathematical brilliance and a spiritual purpose, each design representing lineage, rank, or a moment in history. Masks carved from local wood carried symbolic meaning and were worn during rituals marking birth, maturity, marriage, and the passing of elders into the ancestral world. Spirituality in Kasai was woven into daily life. People believed that the visible world existed side by side with an unseen realm inhabited by ancestors and spirits. Illness, prosperity, fertility, and conflict were understood as part of a larger spiritual balance, and diviners worked as intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. Sacred forests, rivers, and objects were treated with deep reverence. To disturb them carelessly was to risk disrupting the harmony that tied people to their ancestors. Most people lived through farming, hunting, fishing, and craftsmanship. Cassava, maize, sorghum, peanuts, and beans grew in fields cleared with handmade iron tools. Markets were lively places where people traded fish, salt, cloth, pottery, and tools. Trade routes extended beyond Kasai into Angola and Katanga, forming economic and cultural links that shaped regional identity. Everything was interconnected: the land, the ancestors, the community, and the cycles of nature. Ceremonies marked every important stage of life and connected people to their heritage. Birth rituals welcomed the newborn into the lineage. Initiation rites transformed children into adults and taught them the customs and responsibilities expected of them. Marriage celebrations united not only two individuals, but two families, two histories, and two lineages. Funerals honored the departed and ensured that their spirits would join the ancestors who watched over the living. Music and dance were essential in these moments. The beat of drums, the sound of wooden xylophones, and the chanting of voices brought the community together and connected them to generations past. This was Kasai before dramatic change, before foreign powers arrived, before borders were drawn, before the soil revealed a treasure that would alter everything. By the end of the 19th century, the people of Kasai lived according to systems shaped over centuries. Their societies were intact, their traditions strong, and their connection to the land unbroken. But beneath the red earth lay a secret that neither elders nor kings could have predicted, a secret that would draw colonizers, traders, fortune seekers, and corporations from far beyond Africa, a secret that would redefine politics, economics, culture, and identity. That secret was diamonds. Their discovery would bring opportunity and devastation, growth and conflict, prosperity and loss. It would transform quiet villages into bustling centers, disrupt ancestral traditions, and reshape the meaning of land, labor, and community. Before diamonds, Kasai was a world guided by balance, memory, and spiritual harmony. After their discovery, the region would enter a new chapter, one filled with both extraordinary promise and profound challenges. The ancient world of Kasai was about to meet the forces of global desire, colonial ambition, and economic upheaval. Discovery of diamonds in Kasai did not happen with a single dramatic moment, nor with a sudden shout of triumph in the forest. It unfolded gradually through scattered reports, rumors in trading posts, and the growing attention of colonial agents who sensed that something valuable lay beneath the soil. At first, local communities noticed only small strange stones appearing in riverbeds, shimmering faintly in the sunlight. They were beautiful, but to the people of Kasai, beauty was nothing unusual. The forests, the rivers, the people themselves already held beauty. A stone was only a stone until foreigners gave it new meaning. When Belgian colonial officers and prospectors first realized the scale of the diamonds beneath Kasai, they understood immediately that the region held something the world desired. Their maps marked not just rivers and villages, but future mines, extraction routes, and transport stations. Decisions were made far from Kasai, in offices in Europe, by men who had never seen the Kasai River or heard the voices of its people. Suddenly, an entire region was redefined as a resource zone, a place not of culture and tradition, but of economic potential. The arrival of prospectors disrupted the quiet rhythms of village life. Outsiders walked with strange tools, measuring land, digging into riverbanks, speaking languages unknown to local communities. At first, many villagers observed with curiosity. There was no reason to fear. The land had always been theirs, and the ancestors guarded it. But soon, the changes became impossible to ignore. Colonial authorities declared vast territories as state-controlled, placing ownership of the soil into foreign hands. Chiefs and elders protested, but the power they held for generations meant little in the face of new laws and new weapons. Soon, the extraction of diamonds began in earnest. What had once been peaceful riverbeds became crowded with miners. Men who once farmed their family land or fished with their fathers were recruited, some willingly, others under pressure, to work long hours searching for stones that did not belong to them. The rhythm of life that followed the seasons was replaced with the rhythm of labor. Days became measured not by sunrise and sunset, but by quotas and supervision, by the demands of a growing global market that had never heard of Kasai. As mining expanded, settlements were transformed. Small villages that had stood for generations began to swell with new arrivals. Some came from neighboring regions, others from far across the Congo. They arrived seeking work, opportunity, or simply the chance to survive. As the population grew, so too did the challenges. Traditional governance systems struggled to handle the rapid changes. Elders who once resolved disputes now found themselves navigating conflicts that came from strangers who had no ties to the land or its customs. The sense of unity that had held communities together began to fray as competition for jobs and resources increased. Missionaries, traders, and administrators also arrived in large numbers. Schools and churches were built, introducing new ideas, new beliefs, and new expectations. Some teachings encouraged literacy and health practices that improved life. Others undermined local traditions, labeling them as backward or incompatible with new systems of rule. Younger generations began to adopt foreign customs more quickly than their elders, creating cultural divides where none had existed before. The rituals that once marked the transition from childhood to adulthood were sometimes replaced with classroom examinations or church confirmations. The economic structure of Kasai changed even more dramatically. Before diamonds, wealth was measured through cattle, land, harvests, and social respect. After diamonds, money became the new standard by which success was judged. Markets expanded, new goods arrived from far outside the region, and a new class of workers emerged, those whose livelihood depended directly on the mining industry. But while money flowed out of Kasai, very little stayed in the hands of the people who extracted the diamonds. For many families, life became both more modern and more uncertain. Environmental changes followed quickly. Forests were cleared to make way for mining operations. Riverbeds were disrupted, affecting fish populations and water quality. Farmlands that once sustained communities were damaged by soil erosion or pushed aside for expanding settlements. The land that had always been a trusted partner began to show scars. Some elders wondered if the ancestors were speaking through these changes, warning that the new path was not in harmony with the old ways. Social tensions grew as mining brought together people of different backgrounds, languages, and customs. Some communities adapted with resilience, blending traditions with new realities. Others struggled, feeling their cultural identity slipping away as the mining towns grew louder, faster, and more transient. The sense of stability that once defined Kasai began to crumble. Families who had lived on their ancestral land for generations now faced displacement, uncertainty, or forced labor. At the same time, the region saw moments of hope and cooperation. Skilled artisans found new markets for their crafts as traders passed through mining towns. Some communities used the new economic activity to build schools and organize local institutions. Women formed support groups to help families cope with the pressures of urban life. Cultural dances and songs were performed in new settings, preserving memory even as the world around them changed. In the midst of upheaval, the people of Kasai continued to find ways to adapt and endure. But the overall transformation was undeniable. Before diamonds, Kasai was a region defined by continuity, tradition, and spiritual harmony. After diamonds, it became a region defined by rapid growth, exploitation, shifting identities, and profound cultural disruption. The balance between people and land was altered forever. The old world of Kasai had not disappeared, but it now lived alongside a powerful new force, one that demanded labor, resources, and constant movement. As mining companies strengthened their control, the political landscape also began to shift. Colonial administrators gained more authority over chiefs, imposing new rules on land ownership, taxation, and labor. Systems of justice that had once resolved conflicts through negotiation and communal wisdom were replaced with rigid legal codes enforced by foreign officials. The role of traditional leaders diminished, and with it, the structures that had maintained social harmony for generations. Yet despite these forces, the people of Kasai held onto their identity. Beneath the surface of the mining towns, elders continued to tell stories to children under the night sky. Cultural ceremonies persisted, sometimes in secret, sometimes openly but with new adaptations. The ancestral world never truly disappeared. It survived in songs, in memories, and in the ways people cared for one another. The strength of Kasai lay not only in its diamonds, but in its resilience. Still, the pressures of colonization and mining spread deeper. Mbujime, once a quiet village, began its transformation into a growing urban center. As more miners arrived, houses were built quickly and without planning. Roads cut through farmlands. Noise replaced the quiet of forest insects. Life in the city no longer followed the rhythm of nature, but the demands of industry. A new identity was forming, urban, crowded, dynamic, and unpredictable. The shift from rural tradition to urban mining life created internal conflicts within families. Young men, who once expected to inherit land or follow ancestral trades, now pursued wage labor. Some became proud providers, earning money for their families. Others struggled with the difficult conditions in the mines, returning home only to find their traditional roles altered. Parents mourned the fading of customs they had hoped to pass on. Elders tried to guide youth who now lived in a world shaped by machines, marketplaces, and company rules. As the mining economy grew, so too did inequality. A select group benefited from the wealth flowing through Kasai, while many miners lived in poverty. This imbalance created tensions and a sense of injustice. People wondered how a land so rich in diamonds could produce so much hardship for those who extracted them. The contrast between natural abundance and human struggle became one of the defining features of Kasai's modern history. Through all of this, the deeper cultural loss became more visible. Rituals that once required specific sacred spaces were harder to perform as forests disappeared. Community gatherings were interrupted by the demands of work. The connection between generations weakened as everyday life grew more chaotic. Some traditions were forgotten, others survived only in fragments. Yet even in these fragments, the spirit of Kasai remained alive. As the era of mining intensified, Kasai entered a new chapter, one shaped by resistance, adaptation, and the constant negotiation between old and new identities. Families learned to navigate both ancestral customs and the realities of industrial life. Some individuals rose as leaders in this changing world, advocating for workers' rights, cultural preservation, and community development. Others found themselves caught between loyalty to tradition and the pressures of modernity. The discovery of diamonds did not simply change the economy. It changed the meaning of time, land, culture, and identity. It redefined what it meant to be Luba, Lulua, or Kasai. It shifted relationships between generations and altered the fabric of daily life. The region was no longer a quiet world shaped by ancestral memory alone. It had become a place of struggle, opportunity, loss, and reinvention. And yet at the core, the people remained connected to their heritage, even if that heritage had to evolve. The story of Kasai after diamonds is not only one of disruption, but of endurance. It is a story of how a culture holds on to itself when confronted with forces far greater than anything it has faced before. The transformation of Kasai accelerated as the 20th century progressed. The region became deeply woven into the colonial economy, and the tension between traditional life and the demands of diamond extraction intensified with every passing year. The once familiar rhythms of life were gradually replaced by the unpredictable tempo of industrial growth. Families who had lived for generations on the same land now faced constant uncertainty as mining expanded and reorganized the geography of their communities. For many people, the shift began with the simple fact that time was no longer their own. In traditional society, time followed nature. Planting, harvesting, fishing seasons, and communal rituals shaped the year. But in the mines, time followed schedules imposed by distant administrators. Bells, shifts, and strict work hours replaced the natural cycle of sunrise and sunset. Men who once knew every tree and path around their village now spent their days underground or along muddy riverbeds searching for stones that vanished the moment they were handed over to colonial overseers. These changes did not affect everyone equally. Some communities tried to continue their agricultural lifestyle on the outskirts of the new mining zones, hoping that the disruption would pass. Others saw their land taken or damaged, forcing them to relocate. There were villages that dwindled as their young men sought work in the growing towns. The result was a patchwork landscape of stillness and upheaval, of tradition and rapid social change layered on top of one another. As mining towns grew, the environment around them began to transform. Forests that once provided fruits, herbs, and medicinal plants were cut down for new settlements or cleared to make way for open pits. Rivers, once clean and central to spiritual ceremonies, became polluted with sediment and chemicals used in extraction. Children who had learned to swim in clear water now found themselves playing near murky streams whose banks were crowded with laborers. Elders spoke with sorrowful voices about how the ancestors' land was changing, how the spirits that lived in the forest and river might be disturbed, and how the balance of the region could be altered permanently. At the same time, the cities that emerged, especially Mbujime, began to shape a new identity for Kasai. Mbujime grew at a pace few could have imagined. Streets filled with traders, miners, cooks, craftspeople and families from every direction. The sound of drums and traditional instruments blended with the noise of machinery, trucks, and voices shouting in marketplaces. What had once been a quiet village surrounded by fields now pulsed with constant movement. Every day, new faces arrived, carrying dreams of fortune or simply hopes of survival. Urban life brought new opportunities. Children gained access to mission schools where they learned to read and write. Hospitals and clinics were constructed, though often understaffed. A small educated class emerged, capable of navigating both local traditions and the demands of the colonial world. Some individuals rose within church institutions or administrative positions, becoming intermediaries between the local population and the authorities. But even this new class faced limits, as the colonial system reserved true power for foreign officials and corporate managers. The cultural consequences of these changes were profound. Rituals that required specific environments, sacred Today, Congo stands not only as a place of precious minerals, but as a place of precious humanity, a place where culture breathes in every dance, every song, every memory, a place where the past and the future walk side by side, a place where hope continues even when the world turns its gaze away. The diamonds may sparkle, but the true brilliance of this land lives in its people, in their courage, in their endurance, and in their unbroken connection to the soil that raised them. This is a land tested by history, shaped by nature, strengthened by time. This is Congo, the city of diamond.